Ulysses coaxes, coaxes. It's all these Greek words. I'm trying to read everything like a Greek word now. Coaxises. This time we watched Season 4, Episode 8, Hercules Unchained.
The Greek version of 50 Shades Freed.
But first, some follow-up. Richard from Tupelo writes, I was enjoying your Catalina Caper episode, and during your Tupperware discussion, I was surprised that you never mentioned that Crow's torso is made of Tupperware. The Tupperware Floralier, to be precise. A product designed to hold lovely floral displays. Crow's body is made from 1.5 sets. Love the show. Oh, well, thank you, Richard.
Yes. Did you know this fun fact?
No, I had always focused on the fact that he has what is not a lacrosse helmet, but it actually is for his basically catcher's mitt and the bowling pin. I guess I didn't really concentrate on anything below that.
You want to keep a respectful distance with Crow?
Indeed.
Very well. Well, thank you very much for your letter, Richard. We keep getting these nice letters. This is some of the best parts of doing this show.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much.
And also of note, Beth, you've done a little of what we call podcast whoring. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, I was recently on another Megaphonic FM podcast called The Opposite of Lonely, which focuses on how to keep social in today's modern kind of disconnected era. And I talk about how things change after you have a baby. Spoiler alert, they change a lot.
And where can people find this?
You can find it on megaphonic.fm/unlonely.
More podcast news. So if you are still yearning to hear our voices on other shows, you have another chance, or more specifically 2 chances, because on the podcast The Scene of the Scene, which is also from Megaphonic, you can hear hot takes on movies new and old. In the oldest case, myself and Chris and Michael from This Is Your Mixtape, we watched Newfoundland's greatest achievement, the film The Adventure of Faustus Bidgood. So there's a lively discussion on that cult dark comedy, which is one of my favorite movies ever. But then more recently, you joined myself and Chris, and we all discussed the documentary 3 Identical Strangers.
That's right. If you haven't heard of it, it's a documentary that's currently getting a lot of buzz for being a very intriguing movie.
Got attacked by 20,000 bees.
It's getting a lot of buzz for basically having a lot of twists throughout. You don't know exactly where the story about 3 identical triplets that were separated at birth is actually going to go. But I gotta say, I've never heard of Faustus Bidgood before, and I looked up the Wikipedia. It sounds really interesting.
It's one of the most bizarre movies out there. It is all on YouTube, that I'll recommend to you off pod. Although it might be the only way to see it at this point. But yeah, it's I think that's recommended viewing for everybody. It's a really surreal movie. Very modern, I think.
So if you want to listen to either of those breakdowns, you can go to megaphonic.fm/scene. Not SEEN, as in we've already seen it, but SCENE, as in this is quite the scene we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, should we talk about this movie instead?
I am flexing in anticipation. Let's do it.
Let me tell you about a little movie called Hercules Unchained. It's Hercules! And his wife, Iole. Oh, and also a young Ulysses is traveling with them. And why not get more Greek heroes for your buck and throw in the Oedipal strife as well? That's right. Herc is asked to intervene in a quarrel between 2 brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, rulers of the city of Thebes and the sons of the tragic hero of Greek drama, Oedipus. But before he can complete his task, Herc drinks from a magic spring, loses all his memory, and becomes a lover of Amy Winehouse. Queen Omphale of Lydia. Much like Queen Samara from the last Hercules movie we watched, see our episode on Hercules Against the Moonmen, Omphale is a heartless man-eater who turns into a kitten upon taking Hercules as her lover. As a result, Herc avoids becoming one of her many trophy men who she slays and turns into statues when she tires of them. Ulysses tries what he can to help the big guy regain his memory, but in the meantime, the unhinged Hercules is planning to throw poor Iole to the tigers for his amusement. Snap out of it, Herc! Ulysses coaxes Herc back to his memories by getting him to do some strongman feats like bending metal and tossing around some kettlebells. And he leaves a treacherous Omphale behind, who, in despair of losing her lover, sachets away into a vat of preserving fluid. Hercules makes it back to Thebes, slays some tigers, rescues his wife, and basically stays out of the way as the brothers kill each other in a duel. Good job, everybody!
Meanwhile, it's the most dreaded day of all on the Satellite of Love, according to Crow. It's the annual Wash and Wax Day, where Joel buffs the bots. Servo initially shares Crow's disgust, but ends up kind of liking it. Down in D13, the Mads are receiving temp help in the form of the world's most iconic Hercules, Steve Reeves. Apologies to Kevin Sorbo. For their part of the invention exchange, Dr. Forrester and Frank present decorator roaches, aka swatch roaches, garish multicolor roaches to hang up in the home. Joel and the bots present the Steve-O-Meter, a device that has cataloged everything invented by Steve Allen, thus allowing prospective inventors to see if Steve Allen already thought of your idea. Turns out Steve Allen already thought of Movie Sign and the Steve-O-Meter. Our next segment sees Gypsy, dressed as the Hellenistic ideal, doing her best rendition of the song from the movie and bashing her head against a lyre.
I'm the Hellenistic ideal! Oh, last night!
You know, folks, you just don't hear music like that anymore.
In segment 3, Joel and the bots find the Waters of Forgetfulness from today's movie. Other enchanted objects they discover include the Dairy Queen Blizzard of Loneliness, the Fruit Stripe Gum of Stability, and the Green Bean and French Onion Casserole of Happiness. The bots press Joel for some facts about the birds and the bees during segment 4, as his robot children wonder why Hercules spends so much time hanging out with that nice lady. Joel, perhaps hoping the bots will read between the lines, tells them that Hercules comes by to eat, visit, and tell secrets. Crow and Servo continue to press their creator, so Joel informs the bots that Herc is the nice lady's live-in dentist and tells them to eat their raisins. In the final segment, Joel and the bots theorize about the phenomenon of Hercules movies. Back in Deep 13, Frank and Dr. Forrester ask Steve Reeves what he thinks, but he just reminisces about cheap booze. Frank fawns over Steve, much to Dr. F's annoyance.
I didn't know that blizzards were a thing back in the early 90s.
Oh yeah, I remember ads for the Land of Dairy Queen, or actually specifically references to the Land of Dairy Queen on this show. And when I was a kid, there was always an advertisement for a Dennis the Menace ice cream cake.
I do remember that. Although I never had Dairy Queen nearby in my area, so it was not something that I got to indulge in very often.
You had the rival Archduke Milk.
Gross.
Lord Milky's House of Beverages. But enough milk chat. We have watched our second Hercules movie. I had no other segue. Why not? That's as good as any.
By the way, the Blizzard came out in 1985.
Whoa, okay.
Wow.
And sold more than 175 million Blizzards in its first year.
But this is our second Hercules experiment, coming to us from the Land of Dairy Queen, aka Italy. And what did you make of this particular experiment, Beth?
Shrug.
I don't know. I liked parts of this episode. I think it's kind of average overall, but there's some good bits. Like, I really like when Crow starts humming Inagata Davida when everybody is rowing.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. There is a reference to Lambada, the Forbidden Dance, which will always get me. There's another great song gag in which Joel and the bots are singing the Barbarella theme.
Right.
But what really, separates the Hercumen from the Hercuboys, or the Hercules from the Herculads, is the sketches in this episode, all of which are great.
Yes. I think I agree with you. The movie itself is the riffs are kind of average. They're cute. I laughed a couple times about what was the one point where they're driving up to a whole bunch of horses and they make a joke about a tailgate party, and just really lighthearted stuff like that was a good way of just kind of cutting the tension. And But nothing was really, they didn't have anything that really sustained me, but those segments are so funny. Some of the best ones they've ever done are in this one, especially my favorite, the Gypsy Serenade.
Yes, and I think, one thing that you want from an MST3K episode is, at the very least, one random goofball appearance from Gypsy, and this does not disappoint. You've got Gypsy banging into things and singing, the two things she does best.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the segments and what makes them so excellent later, but I would just say that I was really surprised to find out that this is the favorite episode of Jim Mallon, and it is one of Joel's 2 favorites.
Yeah, I can only assume, and I can only put words in their mouths, that a big part of this is just the fact that they got a movie that, when they were kids, would have been a big deal. Like Steve Reeves and the Steve Reeves Hercules movies were kind of famous peplum entertainment. Like they were big deals internationally. So maybe there's a certain sense, much like they did with Marooned, where it's like, oh, we're getting away with riffing this famous movie. That might be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it was quite a get. I mean, unlike what Tom Servo says in the final segment, where he's essentially suggesting that the only reason that we've been exposed to these movies is because of a cheap licensing deal. These are actually extremely popular movies. And so it would have been something, it would have been a get, especially back in the early MST3K years, to get something like this, because it wasn't a boring black and white 50s movie, right?
Yeah, this is a big step up from, pilfering the archives of Robert Lippert.
Ugh. Yeah, I would agree with that. Although I will say it has been interesting now that we have 2 Hercules movies under our belt to compare the 2.
Mm-hmm. And I should mention, one of the reasons why we do this is that every year for Labor Day, we celebrate the original laborer, the dodeca laborer, Hercules. So we're going to look at all of the experiments coinciding with Labor Day.
Yes.
What you were saying?
So it will be interesting as we continue on our Labor Day to see what kind of themes, what kind of tropes come out of it, because already I'm seeing some similarities, even though I think the production of these 2 movies is quite far apart.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of caves, you get a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race-esque evil queens, and you have a lot of mishmashing of various Greek myths together.
And one thing I'm trying to remember, because I'm already struggling to remember the story of Hercules against the Moon Men. But I don't think there's anyone who had eyebrows so fierce as Sylvia Lopez in this movie as Omphale.
Yeah, she would have done well now in our Instagram brow heavy era.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so as an episode, it's not their best work. I would not recommend this to somebody who's not, a diehard MST3K fan. But please do check in on the segments.
Yeah, having to compare the 2, one, I think that this is more likely a better movie watching Unmisted, and probably a little bit easier to follow. But I would say that of the 2 episodes we watched, as great as the sketches are in this episode, I think I preferred Hercules against the Moon Men. Like, there are more riffs that I remember, and a lot of great weird sketches, not to mention the whole deep hurting aspect introduced there, and some playful uses of the Mads during those sketches.
So, Adam, I know that you are a drama major. How familiar are you with classical Greek drama?
Well, I did look at these in late high school and early university, which is to say over a decade ago, which is to say I don't remember much of any of it.
Actually, ironically, it was MST3K who kind of made me aware of Greek drama, because in Manos, the Hands of Fate, there's a joke about Lysistrata in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what the hell is this? And then in my first year comparative literature course, we read Lysistrata, which is an ancient Greek play about a whole bunch of women who decide to not have sex with their husbands to stop a war.
Yes, and that is a great and very fun play.
Yeah, we don't often think of Greeks as doing comedy, but they did a lot of comedy. We just mostly focus on the tragedies. Like Oedipus Rex.
Yes, which admittedly is pretty funny, because when you think about it, being called a motherfucker is only the second worst thing to happen to Oedipus.
I actually was riveted by that play. When I first started reading like really, really old texts, I never expected it to be so light and fleet and riveting. It just feels very immediate and clean and crisp and compelling.
I really enjoyed Oedipus Rex, and I really enjoyed Antigone. And I still have strong memories of those, but I haven't read them since my high school days. I was apparently great as Creon in an Antigone once, but that was a long time ago. From what I understand, reading up on the production of both Herculeses with Steve Reeves is that they're just a mishmash of myth, a mythmash, if you will.
Yeah. So both of us, I think, you and I, Adam, we have some exposure to, ancient Greek culture and mythology, but I believe our producer Chris has more sustained encounter with them. You don't actually read Greek, do you, Chris?
Oh, no, not really. I've studied it a little bit, but I only had about a year of Greek or so.
Better than we have.
Yeah, I really drank from the waters of forgetfulness on this one.
Can you give us some summaries about these very important, one would even say foundational Greek myths and how they're used in this slapdash, ridiculous Italian remake?
Yeah, flex the Steve Reeves in your brain and tell us.
Sure thing. So the opening credits tell us that this movie is freely adapted from 3 sources: from the myth of Hercules and Omphale, from the play Oedipus at Colonus by Sophocles, and the 7 Against Thieves by Aeschylus. So I took the pain of rereading Oedipus at Colonus and 7 Against Thieves, which are not the shining gems that Antigone or Oedipus Rex are from the Greek drama canon. But I will tell you what happens in them, and then you can tell me how you think this relates to the movie. So let's start with Oedipus at Colonus, which was written shortly before Sophocles died in 406 BCE. Oedipus, former king of Thebes, is cursed by the gods and tricked into marrying his own mother, and now he is blind and infamous, and his 2 sons, Polynices and Eteocles, have forced him to give up the throne, and they've exiled him. And so Oedipus wanders around Greece with his 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene, and they stumble upon a sacred grove in Colonus, which is a little town just outside Athens. It happens to be the town where Sophocles was born, but I'm sure that has nothing to do with why this play was written. Anyway, says Oedipus, the gods foretold that I should die here. Oh, no, you won't, said the locals, who all run up to him. We know all about you, and you're not going to defile our sacred grove. Get out of here. Hey, says Oedipus. The gods foretold that wherever I die will be blessed. So the whole play turns out to be everybody squabbling about where Oedipus should be buried. His uncle / brother-in-law, because, Oedipus, Creon, wants him to be buried in Thebes, and he tries to steal away Oedipus's daughters. Theseus, the king of Athens, wants him to stay right there and protect Athens, and so he runs off and gets the daughters back. Polynices shows up. He's about to attack Thebes with his Argive army, and he wants Oedipus's blessing on his endeavor, and Oedipus tells him he can fuck right off. Then Oedipus wanders off stage, and he dies, and his daughters lament, and that's the whole play. So, action-packed.
Greeks, it's really important where you bury that body.
It is. Okay, so then 7 Against Thebes by Aeschylus, which was written about 60 years before Oedipus at Colonus, has even less action. Eteocles is inside Thebes.
Who?
Eteocles. You remember the redhead who's the king of Thebes, and he's really crazy and campy and likes tigers?
Okay.
He is inside Thebes. Polynices, his brother, and the Argive armies are at the walls of Thebes. They're going to attack. Thebes has 7 gates around these walls, and a soldier lists in excruciating detail each of the heroes leading each of the armies at each of the gates. And Eteocles responds by saying which Theban hero is going to counter them. That's most of the play. The 7th gate is led by Polynices himself, and so Eteocles decides he's going to lead that gate. So he runs off, and then a messenger arrives to let us know that the city's been saved, but Polynices and Eteocles have killed each other, and everybody gets sad. And that's the entire play. It's just like plotting. Yeah, it's like you're plotting out a really complicated Pokemon battle or something. As far as Hercules and Omphale goes, she's a queen of Lydia, which is in modern Turkey and not on an island like the film says. And there's a lot of different traditions. He might have served as her slave for a year, and they may have had a kid. But basically everybody agrees that they had some sexy times.
I think it's pretty cute that they don't mention, the Odyssey, which is basically considered the foundational text of the Westerns of the Western world.
Well, that doesn't happen yet. the Odyssey would be in the future in Ulysses' lifetime.
I guess, but they, Odysseus is in it, so you have to kind of mention that. Although I guess he was in the Iliad too.
Yeah, that also is in the future. Yeah. This theoretically has taken place. I mean, all right, according to the generally agreed upon chronologies of these things, this is like 100 years before the Trojan War, and Ulysses shouldn't be born yet.
Yeah. With this, the real Odyssey is the friends we made along the way.
Exactly.
That's damn confusing because, ironically, of course, the plays were probably the newest Greek myth, whereas Hercules and Odysseus Hercules is very old, and the Odyssey and the Iliad were written by Homer, which is 1,000 years before Sophocles comes around. So we're dealing with a lot of weird time frames here.
Well, sure, but it's not as if Sophocles and Aeschylus invented Oedipus. Those tales are old too. We just don't have an extant epic. We don't have one that survived from back then.
Good point. Well, one of the few interesting things I found about this movie is Hercules is constantly like, the gods have cursed me, and there's no actual gods in the movie. They're not personified by an actor, and that is what little I know about the Greek civilization, is that kind of tracks with their presence in literature, whereas earlier stuff, they're very active, they're human-like players, and by the time you get to Sophocles' time, they are not there. They're referred to, but they're not part of the play anymore. They're not directly interfering with humans and are human themselves in a way, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it's still very, if I can say, modern ancient Greek. This is a modern ancient Greek.
Okay. Hell, actors schmactors. What I really wanted was a giant floating stone head like in Zardoz.
I know.
That would have been a god to see on the screen.
That's something I've always noticed about these Hercules movies, is they seem kind of reluctant to actually embody the gods. I don't know if it's because these are Italian movies and they want to avoid pissing off the Catholic Church. I don't know, but it's something I've noticed.
Yeah, it is, a little bit odd, given the power of cinema is that you could have used, interesting photographic techniques, even something as simple as forced perspective to have gods present, even briefly. But we don't get that. What we get is theatrical, much like an old play, in that the gods are referred to, but they're not necessarily present. But funnily enough, I don't really feel them in the text of the movie. You don't really get the sense that the gods are influencing how the story is going.
No, not at all, which is kind of essential to Greek myth, which is, I guess, the biggest departure here. It's just they're playing with a whole bunch of pieces and they don't care how they get thrown together. Mm-hmm. Although we did run into one academic source that suggested that some kind of essential truth was coming out of this mishmash. Did you grok that argument at all?
No.
Yeah.
That was ridiculous.
Okay, so it's James J. Klaus is the author, and the title is Hercules Unchained, Contaminatio, Nostos, Catabasis, and the Surreal. So we read it, kind of. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall, so we can't give it to you guys. We can just provide you a link. But
if you do see us on the street, ask us for it real nice, and we'll give it to you.
His theory is that even though it's basically just to throw together a whole bunch of famous names, some truth about how Greek myth works comes out of that, because weirdly enough, they all kind of follow the same beats in terms of you have to go off to war, you have to become alienated from yourself, and then you have your homecoming, or your nostos, where you become a changed man and you basically go through Frodo-like return to Hobbitville. Or Hobbiton?
I think it's Hobbiton. I could be wrong.
Your Frodo-like return to Hobbiton.
One of the things I did, and possibly the only thing that really stood out from the article by Klaus, is I do like that he described the film as I quote, a conflict between the epic and the cartoon, which I think is true of a lot of fantasy cinema. But he seems to use that as kind of a argument against the movie, as opposed to, I think, one of its strengths.
I think he's also trying to argue that there's something kind of postmodern happening here, where you remix all of these myths and then something more interesting comes out of that clash.
Mm-hmm.
But I hate postmodernism, so I don't really want to support that idea.
I mean, you're doing a podcast about MST3. Anyway.
But that's the best kind
of...
That's not postmodern. Look at this. I'm
is.
shaking my microphone in dismay.
So I found the article to be a fun, if unconvincing, reading, trying to argue that although the film was not intentionally doing this really nuanced reading, that you could make this nuanced reading of it. I think the argument is perhaps more postmodern in that sense than its claims about the movie.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that it points out, which I think is completely true, is that kind of myth mashup was totally common in Greek sources. There is no single timeline about these things. We don't have a sense of Hercules was this. We have a handful of extant works that agree sometimes and disagree quite a lot about the details of all of these things, and usually wouldn't have put Hercules and Ulysses together. And I don't think there is any piece that specifically does put them together from the ancient times, but that is totally a thing that could have happened, and they could have totally given a part that normally would go to this one mythic figure and transfer a lot of those details onto another one, and that kind of play and that kind of reuse of these tales was totally common. So you can't really get too hung up about how inaccurate, quote unquote, this movie gets these details, because they're meant to be played with that way.
Yeah, I can't imagine getting angry about that. I just think that this mishmash is really boring and kind of drains all the characters of their interest.
Oh, yeah. All the characters are really thin.
Yeah, I mean...
Then the best of ancient Greek literature that has survived thousands of years. Yes.
So, Adam, you wouldn't be able to tell it from this very bad print that MST3K uses, but apparently the director of this movie, Mario Bava, is quite well known for being a stylish and influential director.
Yeah. Well, you'd be wrong there, because Mario Bava didn't direct this movie.
Oh, he didn't?
No. It was directed by Pietro Francisci, and was credited as special effects and lighting. That's Mario Bava's department here.
I see. Okay.
Although Bava did do a lot more than that. In fact, he's kind of uncredited as like the director of photography, as well as handling like a lot of the camera work, in addition to special effects and lighting. He was a one-man band on this motion picture. And Bava is a super interesting figure. I think a really important one in cinema. Do you know anything about him?
He did Danger Diabolique, right?
Yes, that's right. He is most famous to Misty's, I think, for that. You've seen that episode, right?
I have not seen that episode, no.
The famous final episode of the original run of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Yeah, it's this great, I would describe it as a pop art heist. And I would say that Danger Diabolique is probably the best movie that MST3K ever did. It's a wildly entertaining movie that is in no way bad. It's really great. But just to get a sense of Bava's visual style, here is a montage of a few shots from the film Black Sabbath. And as you can see from these 4 shots, the kind of big dynamic colors he tends to use. You'll see in the Slack now.
Ooh. Look at those shadows.
I would describe him as having a Hulk palette, because you get a lot of purples and greens.
Yeah. Purples and greens and reds. Those seem to be his favorites.
Oh, yeah. You get a lot of stuff that is just so dynamic and just so pretty to look at, no matter what kind of movie that he was doing. And though he's primarily known in terms of being a director for working in the horror genre, I mean, he did thrillers, he did like a Viking movie. He actually shot a Hercules movie with Reg Park called Hercules in the Haunted World that has a strong cult following because of its visuals. Bava's style is really striking and really beautiful. And there's this great quote from Martin Scorsese about Bava as a storyteller. He said, "Bava was not a great storyteller. He was good, very good at something else. He used light, shadow, color, sound, both on and off screen, movement, and texture to lead his viewers down uncharted paths into a kind of collective dream.
Ooh.
And I think that's the best way to describe what Bava's movies are like, is that they're not so surreal that it's like the unpredictable kind of uncanny and terrifying David Lynch dream worlds, but they're more these kind of like giddily, garish and colorful and bright and hypnotic visuals that you get, both in terms of his camera work and the lighting that's used to tell these kind of fantastical stories. And in a way, it improves on the kind of source material that he has, because whether he's doing a horror picture or whether he's doing a movie about Vikings, and he could be doing something realistic, or he could be doing something like his final movie that involves the devil. Regardless of the content, it's ultimately like it's a great way to guide you into a surreal world. And I think all of his movies kind of lead you by the hand into a reality that even in his most down-to-earth movies are somewhat fairy tale-like.
So you can see some of this, I think, in the movie. I mean, the colors you're showing me, especially the greens and blues and reds, come out in the Omphale cave scenes, especially, I'd say.
Yeah, and I have a couple of shots here from the film in a cleaned up widescreen copy, and you can see, yeah, it actually looks pretty striking. Like, it's a lot more subdued than his directorial work, but it's nonetheless like this is quality cinematography with again, you see a fair bit of purple and green in there.
Yeah, it looks like she's seducing a young man under the sea. Links in the show notes.
Indeed. But yes, despite his many accomplishments, he never took himself or his career very seriously, and he didn't like to talk about himself as either a craftsman or as a director. Like, in one of the few times he's been interviewed where he commented on anything or he agreed to an interview, he said, "I've been in the film business for so long, I know everything and everybody, so how could I possibly take this absurd circus seriously?" Before we wrap things up, tying it to this movie, it was Bava who told Steve Reeves to grow a beard.
Oh.
Yeah, if you watch Steve Reeves' earlier work, Steve Reeves is clean shaven. Mm-hmm. And in like later photos I saw of him, he was clean shaven. And Bava just thought that Steve Reeves' face wasn't right. And so he worked really closely with Reeves and was the one who kind of gave him, I think, a lot of screen presence, because Bava specifically blocked scenes in both the Hercules movies that he did, so that Reeves was always the tallest and biggest thing on the camera. Yeah, and I think it really works. Like, you really come away from both movies, even though Reeves is an extremely limited actor. As far as bodybuilders turned actors go, he has less range than Arnold Schwarzenegger. But he does have a certain magnetism, and I think that's because Bava worked so closely with him and knew how to shoot him.
Well, if there was one movie that you would suggest people who don't know much about Bava check out, what would you suggest?
Ooh, that's a tough one, but I think the best movie to watch is a film of his called Black Sabbath, aka The Three Faces of Fear. It is an anthology movie that is hosted by Boris Karloff. And Karloff also acts in the second segment of the movie called The Vertilac. And it gets increasingly unsettling if you watch the original Italian version, where the final segment involves a immobile witch-like creature that was in one of the photos that I sent you there, with this distorted face, this old grandma. It's the most Bava-ish lighting scheme of all of his movies. And there's a really cynical, sneaky sense of humor, and I will spoil this because it's not used in the English version, which is why you have to seek out the Italian cut. But the ending of the movie that Karloff has been hosting ever so seriously ends with Karloff riding on a horse, but the camera pulls back, revealing all of these tired, smoking Italian crew members chasing him with trees back and forth to suggest movement in the forest. And he's on a dummy horse waving goodbye to the audience.
Oh, boy.
Like, that to me is like Bava at his best, is a mixture of like the funny, the strange, and the genuinely horrifying. And so Black Sabbath it is.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shadow 13.
Move over 12 labors of Hercules. It's time for Shallow 13. 13 factoids about the movie and episode Hercules Unchained. Go, Adam, go!
Hercules Unchained was a box office success. It was somehow the third most popular movie in Britain the year it came out, and saw many revivals over the following decades. They even made a comic book out of it. Link in the show notes. People just couldn't get enough of Steve Reeves' muffiny pecs, and can you blame them?
Ayole's song Evening Star was performed by June Valley.
Last night, love was in those eyes.
Valley was a singer with a few modest hits in the 50s. She was also, for a while, the voice of popular advertising mascot Miss Chiquita Banana.
In the Italian version of the film, Ayole's song is performed by Marissa Del Frate, who also had a few modest successes in Italy. This version of the song has an instrumental break, during which we watch Ulysses waving to some pretty girls parading along the beach. Another link in the show notes.
The film credits the music of Evening Star to Tito Manzese. Manzese? Whatever, it's not a real name. It's an anagram of Enzo Massetti, the guy who wrote the rest of the score.
During Evening Star, Tom sings,
Hercules couldn't perform.
Shut up about that.
'Cause he's using steroids.
I am not.
Steve Reeves, in fact, spent the last years of his life promoting drug-free bodybuilding, even self-publishing a book called Building the Classic Physique, The Natural Way.
Hercules drinks to forget. The waters of forgetfulness seem to be a reference to the river Lethe, one of the rivers in Hades. The dead need to drink from the river and forget their mortal lives if they are going to be reincarnated. The river also sometimes appears on the surface world, so be careful out there, campers.
The French actress Sylvia Lopez, who plays Queen Omphale, had a promising career, but it was cut short far too soon. She passed away shortly after the making of this film at the age of 28.
Joel's invention exchange, the Steve-O-Meter, is a hyperbolic tribute to Steve Allen, who was the first host of The Tonight Show and more or less created the late-night talk show.
Well, Steve Allen, as you know, is the author of over 300 books and short stories.
Over 4,000 pop songs.
The board game Blow Your Own Horn.
Allen wasn't shy about letting you know how productive he was. By the time of his death in the year 2000, the number of songs he claimed to have written had crept up to 8,500, including 400 written in a single day before an audience of people in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Most of his songs have never been recorded or published. It also inspired a famous joke. Steve Allen's claims to have written so many songs, name two.
As far as we can tell, Allen never invented a desalination process for seawater, as the Steve-O-Meter suggests. But he did write a series of novels in which he and his wife, Jane Meadows, go on adventures solving crimes. Well, he said he wrote them. They were actually ghostwritten. Oh, Steve.
Oh, Steve. As the camera pans down to reveal that forgetful Herc has dropped the treaty proposal in the mud, Joel and the bots sing, "Peace on Earth was all it said." This line is cribbed from One Tin Soldier, a treacly anti-war song by Canadian pop group The Original Cast. The song tells of two factions warring over a treasure that, in a sub-Twilight Zone twist, turns out to be an inscription of peace on Earth.
Crow name-checks Uri Geller when Ulysses challenges Herc to bend a torch. Geller claimed he could use his telekinetic powers to bend spoons. Though Geller suffered humiliation for failing to demonstrate his powers on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, his exploits inspired a film that tried to make Geller into something of a mythic hero. Mindbender, directed by the great Ken Russell, depicts Geller's powers as so strong that he must escape military custody lest they be used for evil.
In response to the line, "I saw something horrible," Crow blurts out, "Curly Sue?" The film, written and directed by John Hughes, was an attempt to create another Kevin McAllister in the form of the titular pint-sized con artist. Curly Sue was a critical flop and is remembered only for being the last film directed by Hughes and for featuring Steve Carell's first film appearance.
And that's time! I saw so many promotions for that movie.
In the back of every comic book that I bought the year it came out, there was Curly Sue with her arms folded, and I still didn't go.
Yeah, the promotion, the money that they put into that promotion was unbelievable, and I had no idea at the time that it was a flop, but that's pretty funny.
And my pop filter fell down. That's the power of Curly Sue. All right, Beth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so ordinarily it's a shallow 13, but I have a special treat for you. This is actually a shallow 14. as I have an additional fact, a Bava fact, but not a Mario Bava fact. Oh no. For you see, Mario Bava, he sired a son, Lamberto, who is also a film director, and one of his films would be riffed on MST3K, Devilfish.
Devilfish?
Yes. And also, of course, the Bava family name inspired the frequent shout from the Howard Stern show, Bava Booey. Thank you.
Boo. Bava
Booey. Those are facts that I had to share, but now we move on to a different part of cinema history as we talk about Hercules himself, Steve Reeves. Mm-hmm. Now, had you had any exposure to Steve Reeves outside of this, like outside of his Hercules stuff?
No, and I even looked at his film, what do they call it, Filmopedia? Filmography? That's
there you go. Yes, the Filmopedia.
And he didn't do a lot. I heard he was supposed to be Tarzan. It never worked out. This is by far his most famous role. Have you run into him before?
Well, the only thing that I know him from outside of this is, like outside of his Hercules role, is the Ed Wood movie Jailbait.
Boy, oh boy.
Yeah. I have a word of advice because, of course, I wanted to rewatch the movie fresh before we talked about Steve Reeves' career and Jailbait today. Word of the wise, do not Google Jailbait movie. I spent the night in jail. I was the jailbait. Yes, because the jailbait refers to a gun in the film. There's one line of dialogue where a character says, "That's jailbait," referring to a character's gun. Not at all how you would take it now.
Yeah, I wonder if that was just basically clickbait, to put it in modern terms, to try to get people to watch this movie, because there are no scantily clad underage girls, thankfully.
No. Not that I'd put that past Ed Wood.
Yeah. I gotta say, so I have never seen this movie before, so I didn't really have time to watch the whole thing, but I skimmed through it, and in doing so, I came across the best scene I think I've ever come across in a movie, or at least the most like wonderfully inexplicable. I'll put it in the show notes. So I came out of this out of nowhere, not really quite understanding what was going on. So this still looks like something from the Black Lodge. Like, there's weird curtains in the background. There's two men sitting on a couch. One of them looks like Sigmund Freud. The other one is shirtless.
Yeah, the other one looks like Paul F. Tompkins.
And then there's just a levitating gun pointed at nothing.
Well, that's the classic Ed Wood blocking of put as much as you can into the 1x33 frame.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it actually made me think about what can be weirdly like masterful about truly bad movies. Mm-hmm. And especially Ed Wood, like the way he paces, the way he blocks, it creates this kind of surreal persona. Even the way that the actors are told to act, like they just take a beat too long to give their lines, and they do them very woodenly. It feels like a Lynch movie. Like Lynch takes these ideas and turns them into, something truly creepy and masterful because of that. But he's, his actors act woodenly. They do strange things. You have these very odd set pieces. Like, I wonder if Lynch was secretly an Ed Wood fan.
I believe he was, but also when you watch David Lynch anything, at least for me, I can't help but wonder, it's like, how much of this was done on purpose? Some of it definitely seems to be accidental because it drifts from being like a masterful movie or TV show in the case of his Twin Peaks series, where you feel like you are consciously being guided by something, versus the kind of accidental the quality of like, oh, this is not an actor that I'm listening to right now. This is someone that David Lynch finds interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, you get that less out of vision with Ed Wood and more because it's all that he had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think, the sets that you're marking out where like the scene, this is the climax of the movie, which is the best part of the movie. I think this is probably Jailbait is Ed Wood's most competent movie. I'd be really interested in the mail that we get to see if people agree or disagree with that. Because I think it's very middle of the road for the most part. And the acting is the least egregious of all of the Ed Wood performances that I've seen. I'd say most of it is pretty competent. The dad is in Jailbait is quite bad, but he's just a charming old man.
Right. Oh, I just was fascinated about the set in this movie too, which part of it looks like the Sinister Urge set a little bit.
Yeah.
And that kitchen. There's something so creepy about that goddamn kitchen. And he uses it all. Like, it almost seems like he's being deliberate about how he's taking something so pedestrian. You know, something as pedestrian as a kitchen, and then it has a weird wallpaper, and actors are walking in and doing strange things. It gives it this kind of Magritte sense of, like, juxtaposition about it. Like, I kind of want to write an article about this movie.
Well, Ed Wood is nothing if not stylish. Admittedly, once again, out of necessity, you get a weird visual shorthand with him at all times that results in some very compelling images. That's why, I would never say Ed Wood is the worst film director, just because even this Jailbait, I don't consider this to be one of his highlights, but it gets crazy entertaining at the end. And that's when the main baddie, who, as I said before, looks like comedian Paul F. Tompkins nowadays, decides to go full face-off and forces the doctor, who is the father of the the Jailbait carrying son/lead from this movie, forces him to alter his face. And so he's bandaged and smoking for a chunk of time after the doctor reluctantly agrees to perform plastic surgery on this criminal. And the amazing twist, because the criminal does not want to be connected to a robbery at a theater, when the bandages are pulled off at the end of the movie, the police, one of whom is, of course, Steve Reeves. The police come in, and they see that though he no longer has the face of a criminal, he has the falsely accused son's face, who was an accessory to the crime, yes, but not the criminal mastermind. And so they go after him instead. And the revealing of the face change, I'm convinced, is the inspiration for Tim Burton's The Mirror in his 1989 Batman.
Yeah, wasn't the inspiration for Nick Cage's Face Off?
I mean, maybe it depends on how much John Woo studies and loves Ed Wood. I wouldn't put it past Sam Raimi to love the bandaged look when thinking up the look for his character Darkman with Liam Neeson in 1990. But yeah, Steve Reeves. Steve Reeves is here with a very brief beefcake shot where he's just randomly putting his shirt back on in the movie to kind of show off his pecs.
Oh, I missed that. And I gotta say, I think Mario Bava has a point. Without that beard, he's kind of he's handsome, but he doesn't stand out much.
Yeah, and that was the funny thing, is that even though Steve Reeves is so iconic as Hercules, and again, this could be really more credit to Bava than Reeves, he really stands out in Hercules Unchained. I found myself getting confused because not only even though you have that shirtless shot, a little something for the thirsty Reeves fans in the audience, Wood, and I guess this is true of his general incompetence, is that Wood never plays Reeves up for his body. If anything, plays down his muscles and his lean physique by kind of giving him billowy clothes.
Yeah.
And, he just kind of blends in with the scenery. He doesn't really have a really noticeable or forceful or kind of character-filled voice either, because there's a notable difference if you're watching Hercules Unchained and Jailbait, is that Steve Reeves is dubbed in both Hercules movies that he did.
Right. So we actually don't know what he sounds like until now.
Yes. And it turns out he just has a forgettable generic guy voice. There's nothing particularly unique about it. Now, one of the things I found out is that, okay, there's apparently two different dubs for the Hercules movies. In the original dub of the first Hercules, his dub was done by Brett Morrison, who was the voice of the Shadow from 1945 to 54.
All right.
And then there was a second dub that was done by Tetra Studios that we talked about in our episode on KTMA 04 Gamera versus Baragon, episode 21 of It's Just a Show.
They're really good at what they do.
Yeah, and so they do the much better dubs of the Hercules movies that are sometimes a bit tricky to find on DVD, because sometimes you get the original dub that was not heard in the States with Brett Morrison. However, from digging around here, it looks like the voice in at least Hercules Unchained and possibly for the teacher dub of the original Hercules was done by an actor named George Cano, but I can't find any IMDb information on him. That was just something I found in some production information about the two Hercules movies. Beth, I'm surprised that you like these sketches just because you have the tease of Michael J. Nelson as Steve Reeves, but at no point do you see Michael J. Nelson with his shirt off.
Mike's pretty attractive in these segments.
It's the beard. Mario Bava was right.
He's got a real presence. Yeah, it works for him. So I enjoyed that.
I'm sorry, I got to interject. I really like the dopey version of Steve Reeves that we get here, where he's just an overgrown frat boy who's now temping.
Yeah, Mike always did dumb guys really well.
And I really love the Roach invention is fine, but I adore the Steve-O-meter. And I would really only appreciate and understand Steve Allen as kind of a cultural osmosis thing, because I know him best from his appearances on The Simpsons, such as his unforgettable delivery of "I Caramba."
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think we're both too young to really get Steve Allen, so we only know him by kind of sideways references to him in early 90s shows by people who do know who he is. But,
the fun thing about this is in the Steve-O-meter, it has him, they name him as the inventor of movie sign. And what I like about this is I've only recently found out that movie sign exists as a reference to David Lynch's Dune.
Really?
Where they had the worm sign.
Oh,
about
boy.
the sandworms, and I had no idea. I just thought movie sign was just the language of the show and was just pure creativity. So what I like about this joke is that it implies that Steve Allen wrote Dune.
But I think everybody's favorite sketch from this episode is the Gypsy and the Hellenic Ideal.
Yes, I've made this my ringtone.
It starts off with Crow and Servo singing Hail to Eden, which I believe is from Star Trek.
Yeah, that's correct. That would be the Space Hippies episode.
Now, is the Space Hippie one the one where Spock gets...
No, it's not where he gets jizzed on by flowers. That's a different That's a different hippie episode. Okay. Star Trek Season 3 is noticeably not good.
But anyway, and then Gypsy comes on, and this is apparently her setup. She's creating a setup so she can sing her torch song and bang her head against Liar.
It's the best she can do.
Last night!
I don't know why this is so funny, but it is so funny.
I think it just has to do with, what I would say the Joel era has in space is this Pee-wee's Playhouse vibe. And that's exactly what this is, this kind of sugar rush that you get with a wild, let's try it idea. And it makes a certain kind of logical sense. Gypsy is singing and trying to play an instrument. And of course, like all the robots, at least Tom and Crow have, decorative arms. She has no arms. So she does the best she can with what she has, which is to just ram it.
Yeah, I think the Pee-wee's vibe is very well considered. Also, I just want to give props out to Jim Mallon. Like, he was the one who did Gypsy for most of the MST3K run, and that's a very limited character in a lot of ways, and he created something very interesting here.
Yeah, I have to say, despite other hands at Gypsy from the beginning of the show to its most recent incarnation, whenever I think of Gypsy, I think of the doofy voice that he gave her.
Now, do you know what song she's singing in this particular sketch?
Well, she starts off doing a variation of the main song from this movie, the Last Night song, but it segues into something else.
We'll catch up.
I couldn't get to sleep at all.
Hey, Joe, am I the only one who notices I'm not in a grade?
I looked at the lyrics that she sings at the very end, which is Last Night I Didn't Get to Sleep at All. Mm-hmm. It's a song from 1972 from the Fifth Dimension, best known for The Age of Aquarius. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful song.
I would hear this. Did you ever hear this on Oldies Radio when you were a kid?
No. I think this is new to me.
Okay. Oh, wow. I'd heard this song. Like, I kind of grew up with this song as one of a bunch that would be on rotation for Golden Oldies. I liked that there was this unexpected segue into a genuine pop hit.
Yeah, so I also discovered a new song that I like. I tend to like the Fifth Dimension, frankly. So
the question is, would it be better if Jim Mallon were singing the song as Gypsy?
What did you think of the last sketch where they basically kind of have a discussion about why this movie is what it is?
I like that. I think that you had a frequent thing that you get on this show, which is where the characters try to theorize about the making of the movie and why the movie is the way that it is, or just sometimes why the movie is as bad as it is.
Joel and Crow, I think, get into the myth guy.
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, they actually get into some full-on academics there, which I appreciate. And then Tom's like, oh, for God's sake, it's just a distribution deal.
Oh, yes, because he's going on about Joseph Levine, the guy who brought over these movies in the first place.
Ironically, when you think about it, they're basically doing our show where we over-theorize about things that nobody cares about. Well, all our pecs are glistening, mostly because we've all turned off our air conditioning. Why don't we move on to Chris's final factoid?
Okay, why don't we? So you mentioned during the Show 13 that the song from the beginning of the movie, Evening Star, is sung not by the person who's dubbing the voice of Yole, but instead by June Valley. Now, June Valley, as you said, had a couple of modest hits in the 50s, one of which, interestingly enough, was a song that gets mentioned in the riffing of this movie, a song that's very near and dear to the title of this movie. She did a version of Unchained Melody.
Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch a long, lonely time.
That's the worst song I've ever heard.
It's pretty terrible. It's definitely worth checking out if you want to hear an over-the-top rendition of Unchained Melody.
Well, thank you for that, Chris. Thanks, I hate it, as the kids say.
It's pretty bad. I wanted to make sure you knew about it. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to share your jailbait opinions, wait, maybe not, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows over at megaphonic.fm. And thanks, as always, to all of our Patreon supporters. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits from this episode and a lot of our older ones by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And of course, if you want to follow up with anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/34.
All right, Chris, I am just about ready to drink the waters of forgetfulness to get this episode out of my mind. What are we looking at next time on It's Just a Show?
Well, the last few episodes we watched, we've had, let's see, boys in wizard robes, and then girls in bikinis, and now boys in sandals. So maybe next time, let's turn to Season 10, Episode 2, Girl in Gold Boots.
Intriguing. Have you seen this one?
No, I haven't.
Well, this will be interesting to look at, because last time we were in the sci-fi era, there was a slow but steady progression as we made our way to the Deadly Mantis. So who knows what this will bring us?
Let's give it a try.
And it's available on Netflix right now.
Yes, it is. It's on Netflix. It's one of the chosen few.
All right, well, on that note, until next time,
Hercules will return in Samson and Son.
And remember, Oedipus actually never had a tragic flaw.
Excellent. Take it away, Theme Squad.
Beth.